All right, young scholars, this week we are starting CSS as we will cover over the next 3 weeks, 9/24, 10/1, and 10/8. You'll notice, as I did with the first HTML, there's also additional PowerPoint content for you to look through at your leisure. So previously we've discussed HTML, which gives us a web page with basic functionality. With CSS, we can make our HTML pages look better, more visually appealing. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It saves us a lot of work because we can use it over and over again, whether it be copying the same code from one web page to another within the style tag, or we can save it externally as a .css file, which allows us to simply externally reference it within each web page that we need it, which we'll discuss momentarily. So as I'll touch on multiple times throughout this slide, just to get it through your heads so you remember it, there are 3 elements to a CSS statement. The selector, which is what HTML section it affects, which is in our example image here, is heading 1. The property is what attribute of that HTML section you're going to change or affect, in this instance, color. And what change are you going to make to that attribute is called the value. So in this case, red. By default, all text in HTML is black. All backgrounds by default are white. So in this instance, anything labeled header 1 within your HTML file would now be red based on that code. So while HTML defines us a structure start to end, our CSS style sheets allow us to make it look better. There are 3 types of ways that we can use it. Externally, we simply reference to a .css file, which we store somewhere else on our web server. That's the preferred way of doing things. However, since you're not just experts yet, it is more likely you're going to use the next option, internal. The styles are defined inside the HTML file, usually in the header section within the style tags. And then there is inline, which we showed you with HTML, where the style is defined inside an existing tag within the body section. We have that attribute, we assign it a value, we change it, etc. So as I just mentioned, inline, we use style attributes inside those elements or tags. Internal, we put everything within the style tag. And external, we use the link tag element to link to an external CSS file we've stored. Here's an example of inline. We touched on this within HTML. You have your header 1 tag, you have the style attribute, and then you set the value color blue. So now anytime on this line of code, anything's put within this text area, it will be blue. That is why most individuals tend not to use inline CSS coding, because you'd have to go through and do it with every single line. In the next slide, you have the paragraph set to be red. So anything written in that text box area or section would be red. But the next line, say you just put the P tag and put something in there, because you've only done it inline, it's going to be back to the default black color. So here's an example of why more people use internal. I'd say probably about 70% of the time people use external, 25% of the time internal, and the other 5% of the time inline. So an internal CSS defines the style within the single HTML page. It's usually dropped within the header tag using this style tag. So the following example sets the text color of all of the header 1 elements just within this page to blue, and the text color of all the paragraph elements to red. Additionally, it's got a powder blue background. So within our entire style tag here, we set up our body. Background color is now going to be powder blue. Anything now within our body tag that's displayed will now have a powder blue background behind it. Within our header 1, anything is going to be colored blue that is defined as the header 1 tag. And with the paragraph, anything defined as a paragraph will be red. And this will do this for the entire HTML file you've created. Any header 1 will now be blue. Any paragraph will now be red. Anything typed in the body section will have a background that is powder blue. With the external example, all of that code is simply stored in a styles.css file without that style tag, and then is referenced back into the HTML page using this link rel. Style sheet defines what it is. href you've seen before is the hyperlink reference, and styles.css. What most people will do is wherever they've stored it, let's say website.com/CSS folder /styles.css, they'll put in the entire URL that references that CSS. So here's an example of how it would look if you were to save it simply as a .css file. You'll notice it has everything you just saw within that style tag, except for the style tag itself. We don't need it now. It's saved as a .css file. It's understood now that it is a cascading style sheet. So beyond what we just covered, you can modify color, font, size of text, spacing between elements, how they're positioned, what background images or background colors can be used, and different displays for different device sizes and screen sizes. We'll see more of that over the next 2 weeks. So why might you want to use different style sheets? Well, years ago when you had Internet Explorer was set up completely different and would view completely different than other types of web browsers. While not as prevalent these days, it's still something you may want to consider. Somebody looks at your website on Safari, it looks different than Google Chrome, for example. You may want to go in and modify the color scheme that you've set up with the size of your text, because it may look different when other people view it. So here's 2 other examples of external style sheets. You know that because we've saved it externally as styles.cs and styles2.cs, and there's no style tag. So in this example, we're giving any header 1 text a border that's black and making it align left. In this example, we're doing the same, except it's now red and aligned to the right-hand side. So as a refresher, style sheets are put together with a selector, 1 or more property types, and 1 or more values for each property. And to link, as we just showed, you use that link href referred to the specific file that you've saved your CSS as. So the different ways to set this up. You can use IDs, which are used to define larger structures, but it can only be used once. You can use .class, where you name whatever you want that class to be. It can be reused over and over again. Think of inheritance with Java, which we'll refer to later on in the slides to give you a clearer idea. Here on slides 15 and 16, we simply have visual images of what your HTML code here can help and assist making your visualization look like. And here's another example of changing the text colors using CSS code. So the style tag is the most important thing when using CSS code. Everything needs to be put within that open style tag and that closed style tag. Otherwise, the web browser, the WYSIWYG, whatever you're going to use to interpret your code is not going to understand it. So as you probably noticed, the color property helps us define the text color. The font family property helps us define the font, and the font size property helps us define the text size. Similarly, the border property defines what the border is. The padding property allows for spacing in between text and the specific border. And you've probably seen this using Microsoft Word to type up certain documents. You can also use CSS to modify your margin. And here's some different ways that you can modify your HTML file using CSS. Color property, all of these we've previously discussed on the last slide, but given more descriptive information. Again, we've touched on how to specifically link an external CSS file. Here's a similar example to what I told you, where you might want to use the full URL so that every time it goes there, it knows where it is. The second bullet or the second section here is if it's in a specific folder. Now that specific page, web page you've created, has to be on the same web server as this folder and file. Same example with the last one, where it's just referring to these styles.css itself, has to be on the same web browser. Whereas if you use the full URL, you could just be playing around with the HTML file on your laptop, desktop, whatever it may be. And it knows, okay, we have to refer to this website and get this style sheet and access it. So it doesn't need to be up on a web server as long as it's referring to this full URL. So again, third time, declaration and selector are the parts of CSS. So in this example, our selector is the body, and the declaration is what we're doing to that. So any text within the body is going to be 10px, 10 pixels. The background color is going to be white, and the text color is going to be blue. Doesn't matter if it's header 1, paragraph, anything you put in that body. So I touched on this within HTML, but there is a way to modify or overwrite the link defaults. So in this example here, for an active link, we're applying a different color to the link before it's visited. Then in the second example, we're applying a color to a link before it's visited. So what's the difference between the two? Well, in the first example, it's before it's visited. And the second example, it's after it's clicked. What happens when it's visited? Then in the third example, you can modify the color when you hover over it. And then in the last example, you can set any HTML page to be active. And if you define it as active, then you could set a completely different color to it than any of the other pages you have. So as an example, you can create a file called example.css, where you set a background color, header color, and alignment, and text color, size, and font. You could do that within your HTML file using the style tag. So here we did the background color purple, which was our first item, background color. Next, we want header color and alignment, then text color, size, and font. So here's an example of header color and alignment. We created header 1 with the color red, made it align center. And then on slide 27, we did our text color, size, and font for our regular text. So in this example, paragraph is now set to blue with the size of 12 pixels, and the font type is set to serif. So if you copied that and pasted all of it in your WYSIWYG, it should show up exactly as shown, as long as you have everything within the style tag. And then if you so choose, you can copy everything within the style tag, excluding the style, open, and close tag, put it into Notepad, and save it as example.css. And if you had anywhere to upload this to a web browser, you'd refer back to that way of externally linking that CSS code into your web page. So again, for the fourth time, a review of the 3 elements to a CSS statement. The selector, what is HTML, or what sections of the HTML are impacted. The property, what attribute are you setting? And the value, what change are you making to that attribute or property? Again, external, you store it in a separate .css file, and it's referred to, can be referred to in any HTML page. The internal, you put it in the style tag and is only applied to that specific page. The inline only refers those styles and attributes to the one specific line of code that you have it used on. As mentioned, you can use inheritance if you so choose within CSS. Each section can be modified using internal and inline CSS code. If you use inheritance, works in the same way that it does in Java or Program, for example. So within your internal CSS, you just use general tags like paragraph or header or body and tell us what you're going to do. In this example, all we're doing is changing the paragraph color of the text to red. Here's another example of internal CSS, but we're using inheritance. .bobdole is our class we've created, where the background color is red and the text color is blue. So now when we refer to our paragraph class equals Bob Dole, chicken nuggets taste good, well, what's going to happen? The text of that statement is going to be blue, and the background color around it is going to be red. So on your screen, you'd have chicken nuggets taste good in blue text with a red background. So here's another example. If you were to copy the left-hand side and then the right-hand side of this code in your WYSIWYG, you'd see we've created a class called intro, where all we're setting is the background color to yellow. So you'll notice when I run this, welcome to my home page is not yellow. My name is Jerry. George is unemployed and lives with his parents is. My neighbor is Kramer is not. And Gene sounds like Mickey is. Well, let's look at it. We have nothing related to the intro associated with welcome to my homepage. That's why there's no yellow background. However, we created a div tag with class equals intro. So anything within our div tag here has referred to this intro class. So my name is Jerry. George is unemployed and lives with his parents. That is why they have a yellow background. My name is Kramer. My neighbor is Kramer, rather. Does not have anything associated with the intro class. That's why there's no yellow background. And then Gene Sounds Like Mickey does have that association with the intro class. Class equals intro refers back to our class inherited that yellow background we set up, which is why they all have those yellow backgrounds. So another reminder on how we can overwrite default links and change colors. We simply modify the color value. As I talked about in the HTML section, by default, an unvisited link is underlined in blue, a visited link is underlined in purple, and an active link is underlined in red. You can change these by using CSS as just displayed in the previous slide. So if you wanted to, you can copy this code from slide 39 and slide 40 to show you exactly how that would work. So if you were to simply copy the code from slide 39 on here, you notice by default, all of these links are blue. If you copied slide 40, and copied that code into the style tag and ran it, now we've set all our defaults to be red. So now instead of it being blue by default, now it will display blue if we visit it. And it should display black if we hover over it, but for some reason it's not. Next, you'll remember the first example we gave using just HTML to create a drop-down list. You remember it looked very boring, wasn't very helpful to us. CSS allows us to create either a vertical or horizontal navigation bar. So if you wanted to create a vertical navigation bar, you would copy the codes from 43, 44, 45, 46, into your WYSIWYG. However, we're going to create a horizontal. So we copy the code from slide 47, 48, 49, and 50 into our WYSIWYG, as well as 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, and then 57 we put into our body section. And we do all of that and then run it. We have this little vertical or horizontal rather display. We scroll over, it turns to red. We now have our drop down looking nice instead of the example we did with HTML, which looked awful. So what do we do here? Well, our .navbar sets up our class navbar, which is simply an abbreviation for navigation bar. So we set that background color like we have here. We aligned all our text to the left with font size 16 pixels, but then centered our text and put padding in between. Then we have our dot drop-down class, where we set the text the same. We made the color white, though. We inherited the background and font family from the rest of our navigation. So you'll see there, the color of the background is now white. You'll see on the next one, dot navbar, we've now set the background color to be red. When we hover, you'll see the A colon hover. So when we hover over them, they are now red. We've also created a box shadow, which is what you saw when you scroll over your favorite sports teams. And all of these specific will now be referred to within our body. Div class equals navbar. We're now inheriting everything from that navbar. So we have drop down, we inherited from above. Drop button, we inherited from above. Drop down content, we inherited from above. And if you wanted to change any of these links, you would simply, where the dollar or hashtag is here, paste a URL as you so chose. So that is all for this week. Next week, we are going to work specifically on utilizing more CSS code to help us create specific things we may want to utilize in the future.